now, as areas are managing the pandemic and allowing or relaxing restrictions and allowing the reopening of the economy, certainly we have adjusted our plan to take that into account.
Technology is transforming how we think, how we lead, and how we win. From Intervision, this is Status Go, the show helping IT leaders move beyond the status quo, master their craft, and propel their IT vision. COVID-19 certainly has changed the conversation for 2020 and beyond. On Status Go, we've tried to bring you content related to COVID that is applicable now, but also well into the future. In this episode, we are going to do the same, but perhaps with a different perspective than you may have seen. This is your host, Jeff Tunn, and I am happy to present the first episode in our Status Go Partner Innovation Series, designed specifically to highlight Intervision's industry-leading partners, their organizations, their teams, and their overall technological ingenuity, as we discuss various topics ranging from leadership to transformation to products and services. In this conversation, I am joined by Brad Minnis. Brad is the Vice President of Environment, Health, Safety, and Security for Juniper Networks. Juniper Networks is leading the revolution in networking. Juniper's sole mission has been to create innovative products and solutions that meet the growing demands of the connected world. Brad, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Jeff, for having me. I appreciate it a lot.
I'm really looking forward to our conversation today, but as we dig in, I'd love for you to share a bit about your role with our audience. They may be a little unfamiliar with the different areas that are encapsulated into your title, so I think it'll be an important part of our conversation.
Great. So I head up our environment, health, safety, and security team globally for Juniper. My role includes not only EHS&S, but also crisis management, business continuity, and certainly I've been leading the team at Juniper as we've been dealing with the COVID crisis around the world.
As you unpack some of that, I think what would be familiar to our audience is the crisis management, perhaps, but definitely the business continuity type activities. What goes into your work as far as the environment and health safety part of Juniper Networks?
Sure. So I manage environmental compliance globally. So that's all the impacts the company has on the environment from the use and generation of hazardous materials. As you may know, we're a manufacturer of electronic goods, and there are certainly some hazardous processes that go into how we make our products. So both internally, but also at our partner companies, our manufacturing partners, we really deal with environmental permitting, environmental management, and protection of the environment. From a health and safety perspective, on a global basis, I have a team that really manages compliance with all the different regulations around the world, like OSHA in the U.S., but most countries have a framework for health and safety with regulations that we're required to comply with. More importantly, and specific to COVID, really looking at protecting our employees. Health and safety of our employees has been our number one priority throughout COVID. And so we've implemented a number of measures to ensure the safety of our workplace, but also the protection of our employees.
Yeah, I mentioned at the outset that your experience, your perspective with COVID was different probably than most of our listeners who are focused on the technical aspects of what has gone on, the work from home, and making sure that all that was implemented and secure and different aspects like that. But you, because of the global nature of Juniper, it's kind of like the rolling blackouts that you hear about occasionally, especially in California. You experienced rolling shutdowns across the globe, and you're now experiencing rolling reopening. So take us back to late 2019, early 2020, when you first started seeing this on the horizon, and talk about some of the things that you were able to do or that you already had in place, for example.
Yeah, and I'll start with planning, and planning is everything for an event like this. Back in the early 2000s, we had the SARS outbreak in Asia. We've had H5N1 bird flu. We've had MERS and other potential pandemics. Early on in 2005, Juniper built a pandemic preparedness plan to manage a situation just like this. And that included looking at the World Health Organization pandemic phases, looking at CDC guidelines, as well as our global footprint. We built a plan on how to deal with a potential pandemic, particularly in Asia, but globally as well for our offices. So, as part of building that plan, we had stockpiled personal protective equipment like N95 masks and gloves and hand sanitizers in our facilities around the world. And so in late 2019, as we started seeing the emergence of the coronavirus in Wuhan, China, uh, we're heavily manufacturing in China. We have about 400 employees throughout China in multiple offices. And so we were able to quickly get an understanding of what was happening in China and react very quickly to protect our employees. And that included, a framework for how would we manage the pandemic and in the different phases of the pandemic, we had a number of actions in place that we were able to take early on. And it's allowed us to really successfully manage through the pandemic as it's rolled around the world. Now, it started in China, but then quickly expanded throughout Asia to India, then to Europe, and ultimately to the Americas. And having our plan in place again has really allowed us to react quickly and to stay ahead of most government regulations and many of the other issues that have presented to us. It shut down our manufacturing operations in China
Hmm.
for several weeks. They extended the Spring Festival and essentially closed everything down for an extended period of time. Um, you know, Early on in the planning phase, Juniper had anticipated a large work from home requirement as a result of a pandemic, and certainly that's what we've seen around the world. We never really anticipated a global shutdown, more of a rolling series of shutdowns. Um, but then, as March came upon us, pretty much the entire world shut down.
Yeah.
And so we sent 95% of our employees to work from home. We had looked at what would it take from a networking perspective to enable all of our employees to work remotely, and certainly we had designed our network to support that. And while it never had been fully tested when we sent 95% of our employees home in March, the network held up extremely well. And so, uh, being able to have people shelter in place and work from home was very effective. Now we are a hardware company, and so we've never shut down completely any of our offices. So we've always had about 5% of people working in the office to keep systems running, to keep our labs up and running, to support customers. And so, early on, the framework for how we would manage a pandemic, not only from having people work from home, but how would we manage the health and safety of employees in our offices became very, very important.
I was going to ask if you had uh, kind of seen the future, so to speak, sitting back there in January, February of it spreading. And so you answered that question. But as it became apparent that it was going to be global and was especially going to impact the United States, did you deviate from the plan? Did you stick with the plan? Was there anything in there that you needed to adjust because it was going to be global?
Yeah, certainly you cannot foresee everything. So while we had a framework for how we would manage the pandemic, certainly conditions change quite regularly, almost on a daily basis, and so your ability to adapt and to adjust to local conditions around the world has been very important. So we kind of experienced rolling shutdowns. It started in China, it expanded around the world, and now as areas are managing the pandemic and certainly allowing or relaxing restrictions and allowing the reopening of the economy. Certainly, we have adjusted our plan to take that into account. And so, um, you know, when we talk about a global shutdown, then as restrictions start easing in certain areas around the world, we have started allowing employees to come back into the office in larger numbers, particularly in China. But now you're seeing in Europe as well. As restrictions have been relaxed, we have been bringing more people back to the office environment. However, we are being very conservative, so limiting the numbers to that which is necessary, and people that have to work in the office to execute projects or again keep systems running that enables everybody else to be able to work from home.
Yeah.
We've certainly been enabling that.
So, aside from the monumental task, I can't imagine how you keep track of the government regulations when it's not only national regulations, but state or province regulation, and even here in the U.S. down to the county level. I live in Indiana, and we have 92 counties, and my guess is there's 92 different flavors of the regulations going on right now. So I can't imagine that task. But aside from that, talk to us about the decision making process that you go through and the approach you take as you begin to reopen an office, as you start to bring people back in. What's that process look like?
Yeah, so one of the things that we did very early on is we established country emergency committees in each country where we do business or where we have an office. Those country emergency committees are informed by our global health and safety monitoring system. So we have resources around the world that provide safety and security intelligence, as well as summaries of local regulations and requirements, but also understanding local conditions in the areas that we do business. So the country emergency committees were really assembled to manage the pandemic for their local countries, and that has been very valuable. Having people on the ground in the local countries, understanding what's happening and what the local situation is, but also taking into account the sentiments of our employees. What is their readiness to return to the office environment as restrictions are relaxed? There's considerations like family care and child care. You know, One of the things we like to say is, it's not just employees working from home. It's employees that are forced to be at home, that are managing family members, managing children, and so trying to work from home in that environment is very difficult. But the local country emergency committees were instrumental and have been instrumental in keeping up with what's happening in their region, what is the situation for their employees, and then adjusting our management plan as appropriate.
Are you having daily calls with this distributed team, or how are you personally staying abreast of the dynamic environment that we're in right now?
Yes, we activated our crisis team back in January, as I mentioned, uh, when the pandemic was first emerging around the world. We had almost daily calls. It was more about our supply chain in the early days when the impacts were in China. We have multiple manufacturing locations in China. We are a critical infrastructure manufacturer. We power the internet with our products, and as people were forced to go remote on a global basis, that put a large strain on service providers like AT&T, like Verizon, and many of the other ones around the world who are all our customers. And so our ability to build and ship product to keep the internet running and deal with the massive increase in bandwidth that service providers have seen has been really critical to us. And so again, manufacturing was the biggest impact at first, but then as the pandemic progressed around the world, obviously it's impacted people in ways that we probably never before anticipated.
Yeah.
So our ability to keep our operations running has really enabled, the global continuance of internet commerce and people's ability to work remotely in a safe fashion.
Yeah, those of us that rely on the internet every day, we thank you for making sure that all of that is continuing to run through this time for sure. When we spoke last week, you talked a little bit about your reopening process, and I think you described four different phases that you go through and some of the decision making that you're doing in that. Could you walk us through those phases and where you are in that process today?
Sure. So we built a return to the office plan that included a phased approach to returning back. Now, phase one, we have never been out of phase one. So, we never, again, completely shut down our offices because we've got to keep systems running that enables everybody else to be able to work. So phase one called for about 5% of our employees being able to work from our larger facilities, our engineering, R&D, and customer support facilities. And we stayed at phase one. We went to phase one essentially from January in China, but then globally in March.
Hmm.
And as areas have begun to reopen, we've been aligning our phased approach with the easing of government restrictions, local conditions. The number of cases are dropping in many areas of the world, and looking at our readiness globally to move to the next phase. So, phase two really looked to enable about 20% of our employees to come back into the offices. We are largely at phase two around the world, but that required us to implement a number of guidelines, not only to comply with local government regulations, but also to ensure the health and safety of our own employees. So our phase two return to the office plan included a number of things like temperature checking and the requirement for people to wear masks and other personal protective equipment in the office. We're doing temperature screening at most of our locations around the world to detect people with potential symptoms and not allow people with symptoms to come into our office. We also implemented a robust training program about what it would look like for employees when they came back to the office, and we delivered that electronically through our learning management system. And that addressed things like, what are the symptoms of COVID? How can you protect yourself from COVID? Health monitoring and health certifications for employees that would come back into the office. It started there, but then it's about social distancing. So really looking at our facilities, what is the appropriate number of people to bring in so we can ensure that we maintain social distancing guidelines and monitor our buildings for potential hotspots. So if you have too many people in a certain area of the building, that might enable the spread of the virus.
Hmm.
So keeping, our philosophy is that we didn't want to be the trailblazers of getting back into the offices. What we have done is, as we have started reopening around the world, we've done it very conservatively, but also learning as we open various facilities. We've learned a lot about how to manage the facilities and how to protect employees as they've come back. So, as we've opened around the world, certainly there are lessons to be learned from the experience that we can employ in other areas around the world. The other issue is, as areas have begun to reopen, there have been surges in the numbers of cases. And so We had always anticipated that even though we've moved to the next phase of reoccupancy, based on local conditions, that might require us to move back and revert back to a previous phase. And we have seen that in certain areas in China just over the weekend. This weekend, South Korea had a large surge in the number of cases. And so we have reverted back to previous phases as we gain experience and as we see what's happening in the local areas that, as they do start to reopen.
Those lessons learned as you do the rolling back to the office have to be incredibly valuable. I think our listeners would be interested in what types of things have you implemented in your facilities, things like uh, one-way hallways, or reduce the number of people in conference rooms, or reduce the number of people in elevators. What types of things have you put in place to help protect the employees from that regard?
Yeah, so we looked at our facilities holistically and including down to the conference room level and set maximum occupancy thresholds for every area in the building. And so, what previously might have been a 10 to 12 person conference room is now a 4-person conference room. And the same thing in office environments, where we might have had a work area that held 100 employees. We may only have 25 to 30 employees in those areas now, but really respecting the physical distance and the social distancing, which is extremely important in controlling or preventing the spread of the virus.
Yeah. We had VP of HR on the show, Melanie Bergner, a few weeks ago. We were talking about some employees may not be ready to come back. Are you making allowances for those who want to continue to work from home during the callback? Or what kind of things have you put in place at Juniper to take that into consideration?
Yes, employee sentiments and employee considerations have really led our decision making process. And again, as I mentioned, people have child care issues and family care issues that they're dealing with, but also just concerns about potentially being exposed as they do come back to the office environment. And so we have conducted surveys periodically to really gauge employees' readiness to return to the office environment, and overwhelmingly at this time, over 80% of our employees say they're just not ready to come back into the office environment based on health concerns, childcare concerns, and other family concerns, and certainly our position is that we are going to be very flexible and enable employees, understanding that they have issues in their personal lives to deal with. We are being very flexible. Return to the office has been completely voluntary on a global basis. We have not forced people back into the office, but certainly we do need people in our labs and keeping the IT systems running. And so, those employees who were designated to return to the office are doing some heroic
Yeah,
things just by showing up.
yeah.
And so, again, it's incumbent on us to ensure their safety when they do return to the office.
Yeah, that's a great point. The people that are in our offices, in our businesses, are uh, putting themselves at risk and therefore are heroic in nature as they go back to work to keep all of our businesses running. Now,
Right.
Juniper is a tech company, and we would be remiss if we didn't discuss technology. And I think our audience, I could feel their ears perk up a little bit to switch the topic to tech a little bit. But how has it impacted or fluent or influenced your decisions and your process? The tech involved.
Managing social distancing in our facilities. If we do have an exposure in our facilities that requires us to understand what other employees may have come in contact with an individual that either has symptoms or reports a positive COVID test, is critically important. Now, Juniper acquired about a year ago a company called Mist Systems.
Hmm.
and Mist Systems is we call it artificial intelligence for IT, and it involves wireless access points that are installed throughout our facilities. And so we've fully deployed the Mist solution in our facilities. But as COVID-19 emerged, um, we found an opportunity to utilize that technology to help enable us to manage social distancing in our office, to identify potential hotspots in the office, and to automate the process of contact tracing. Now, you know, early on in the pandemic, if somebody reported symptoms in the office, it was a very manual process. You'd have to interview employees to see who might you have come in contact with and where were you in the buildings. And that relies on the memory of people. It relies on, we use technology from an access control perspective. We have, video cameras throughout our facilities, but really determining where somebody might have been in the facility, who they might have come in close contact with, again, was a very manual process. It took a lot of time and again, relied on memory of employees, which sometimes is not terribly accurate.
Right, right,
So the missed APs in the facility uh, also do location-based or provide location-based data. And so with the addition of a Bluetooth enabled badge that people would carry around with their photo ID badge, we are able to not only manage the building, the loading of employees in our buildings and identify potential hotspots and be able to deal with that. But if somebody reports symptoms in the office, we can quickly go back into the system over a period of time to determine exactly where they traveled throughout the building, and also to determine what other individuals might have come into close contact with them while they were in the building. So, what was formerly a very manual process that could take, sometimes many hours or even days,
right.
now we can instantly perform that contact tracing exercise, which allows us to prioritize. Not only does it identify who might have been in close contact, but over what period of time. So it gives us a priority list of contacts based on the amount of time they may have been in contact with somebody. So that really enables us, number one, to quickly notify other individuals that might have been in close contact, to have them self-isolate, monitor their symptoms, and reduce the potential of a spread, a more widespread problem in the offices. So the Mist solution has really been valuable in enabling us to quickly manage the loading in the building, but also to quickly conduct that contact tracing and identify where we might have additional risks.
I think that is a great use case for the technology, the artificial intelligence that goes into it, and it's probably not one that too many people, when they were looking at the product marketing, took into consideration the contact tracing for a global pandemic. But what a great use of technology! I just think that's fascinating when you were telling the story last week. So, Brad, you know that here on Status Go, we are about action. And what we would love to do is leave our listeners with one or two things that they should do tomorrow because they listened to you and I today. So, what are a couple of things they could do?
Yeah. So, number one, again, I would caution, if you're able to be conservative about how quickly you bring people back into the office. Number one, particularly if they're being effective working remotely. Uh, you know, Overwhelmingly in the surveys that we've done with our employees, people say they're working harder, they're working longer
Mhm.
hours, and they're being very effective working remotely. And so flexibility, I think, is key. Key to employees' safety, but also key to their motivation. People have issues they're dealing with, and forcing them to come back into the office could create bigger problems for companies.
Right.
And so, number one, flexibility. But number two, you've got to have the mechanisms in place to keep people safe while they're in the office. And so, limiting touch points, enhanced cleaning, social distancing, all are extremely important. And the other thing I would say is people, particularly around the Mist application, while it is a valuable technology, there are significant concerns around employee privacy. And so
Yeah.
one of the things that we've done is we've issued Bluetooth beacons to employees is when we upload them into the Mist platform, the only thing the Mist platform sees is a beacon identification number. We don't put any employee personal information into the Mist platform. When we do the contact tracing, there's a very small team of individuals that have access to the actual identity of the employees. That's a big deal. And around the world, there are various privacy rules. In some countries, like in Europe, they're much more strict about maintaining privacy, but also maintaining privacy of people's medical conditions. If somebody reports symptoms, we don't broadcast to the whole company who's got COVID, or because that just freaks people out,
Yeah.
frankly.
It sure does.
So privacy concerns are a big issue, and being transparent with employees on the use of the technology is critically important.
Yeah.
But the other thing I would say is having the mechanisms in place and implementing health and safety measures to protect employees. That's got to be top of mind for tech companies, or any company, frankly.
Yeah. Well, Brad, that is great advice. And I think it's advice that our listeners can use and grasp onto as we're all wrestling with returning back to the office, returning back to some semblance of normalcy. So thank you very much for those insights. I really want to thank you for taking the time today to talk with us. I know with keeping track of this on a global basis, you have to be incredibly busy, and I appreciate you taking the time out to sit down and chat today.
No, it's my pleasure, and certainly here to help in the larger effort, not just our company, but we collaborate with other companies on what we're doing, look at best practices, and keep the discussion going. So we try to stay ahead of the game. So thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you again. To our listeners, if you have a question or want to learn more, go to intervision.com. The show notes will provide links and contact information. This is Jeff Tunn for Brad Minnis. Thank you very much for listening.
You've been listening to the Status Go podcast. You can subscribe on iTunes or get more information at intervision.com. If you'd like to contribute to the conversation, find Intervision on Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter. Thank you for listening. Until next time.